Okay, this evening, our good friend and leader seems to have developed a split personality. He is seeing himself as Joseph III part of the time, and later on he may switch back to his other personality. But in the meantime, I would like to share some of the things that Paul DeBarthe has worked on, and he is going to be focusing this evening on the life of Joseph III as he portrays him. And so here are some pictures of Joseph III, I guess would be right here. And this is interesting. This is the Smith House at Kirtland, which I think is in process of being restored. And this is the mansion house in Nauvoo, which I think most of us are familiar with, and Joseph III, and the mansion house with the summer kitchen. And these are some of the things that, you know, as Paul has been digging in the dirt, doing his archaeology, these are some of the things that came out of the dig at the mansion house. Oh no, this and this one, I guess, is from Brigham Young's house. Paul has done over the years since the 70s a major exploration on the mansion house, and then has also done Joseph Sr. and Lucy's double log cabin and Porter Rockwell's barber shop in process across the street, and then has done a number of other things, which after he has portrayed Joseph III, we can perhaps get him to switch his personality back and answer some of the questions. So here is the mansion house in 1890 with the hotel wing still on it. And this is the kitchen of the mansion house before the hotel wing added on. And this is what the mansion house is going to look like on Thursday here after we get a significant snowstorm going through the Nauvoo area. If you see things that you would like to ask about later, try to remember them, and I'll be happy to put these pictures back up if you want to ask about them. Here's Joseph III's home in Lamoni, Liberty Hall. So let me take this down, and then Deb, would you like to offer an opening prayer for us?
I will. If you'll bow with me, please. Our Lord and our Creator, we thank you so much once again for this opportunity to gather together as brothers and sisters of the restoration. We ask your blessing now to be upon us and to be upon Brother Joseph as he shares his story. May we all find new perspectives in those things that we will learn tonight. We thank you for the gift of your grace that's brought us together, and ask that your presence might be with us, and that we might share together in love and fellowship. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
So Joseph, it's a real treat to have you come back to visit with us. I'll turn the floor over to you with our little marvel with all the faces on it.
Well, thank you, Brother Cook. Thank you, Sister Luce, and thank you, Brother Bill Shepherd, for inviting me to come and to share a press conference with you. It is an extraordinary event to be invited back. And I would hope for each of you that there would be someone interested enough 100 years later that they would want to call you back from beyond the absurdities of life and the mysteries of God. I am so very, very pleased to be able to respond to your invitation and hope, as I hoped in 1860 when I went with Mother to Amboy, and the people there welcomed me, and I said, if the same spirit that prompts my coming prompts also my reception, I am with you. For me, it is a pleasure to be with you this evening. Brother DeBarthe has asked that I focus upon my younger years because you'll later have a presentation on Liberty Hall, which was my home in Lamoni. And with that, you'll also get an introduction to my later years. He has included it through the magic of your technology. Brother Cook has shown you a few pictures, and it's amazing, but to have had an archaeological investigation at our house is amazing by itself. But it brings back memories, and you're certainly welcome to inquire about those, because yes, I did enjoy playing chess, and I became a moderately good player. The medicine vials do remind me of the foul tasting stuff that we commonly had to take. Fortunately, we had Dr. Bernheisel, who came and he lived in the mansion house from, I think it was 1843 to 1847. And he was one of those unique people who was friends both with Brigham Young and with Emma Smith. And so Dr. Bernheisel was one who discouraged the use of those foul-smelling medicines and encouraged better nutrition and more sleep. And so Mother and I really did come to appreciate his approach. He's a very interesting gentleman, and perhaps some of you will have questions about him because he was probably one of the main instigators of the interest of the Mormons in Texas. Let me just add to that, he had been the doctor for Moses Austin, and that was one of his first medical assignments. And I believe that was Herculaneum, Missouri, along the river. Mr. Austin was dealing with lead, got sick, and Dr. Bernheisel was taking care of him. And on his deathbed, as I understand it, Moses Austin asked Dr. Bernheisel to make his son, Stephen, promise to go settle in Texas. Dr. Bernheisel did pass that information on, according to his testimony to my father while he was living with us. And he was very much interested in colonizing Texas. Clearly, Stephen Austin had been successful in doing so. And so Joseph Smith, my father, became very interested in it as well. Anyway, a couple of years before Father was assassinated, we had a major influx of people coming to the mansion. And so to see the plates that we used, those blue shell-edged, were the ones we ate on most of the time. But then the more decorative pieces like that tuna was something that would be pulled out when someone like the governor was there. And so we didn't use that as much, but we did have some very nice decorative materials. And those were stored in the cupboards along the west wall of the dining house in the hotel. I am very interested that the story of our lives continues to have interest, so that you would call me back. And so I do want to respond to the invitation and introduce you to some of my earliest memories. But first, a tribute for my parents. The Book of Mormon begins with the Nephi acknowledgement of his goodly parents for teaching him of the goodness and mysteries of God. And I would do the same. My father lived and died as a restorer of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I knew him as an always busy man of God who would take me on his knee and bless me that I might have health and wisdom, vision, and leadership qualities that would serve my fellow men. We almost always had guests for dinner, which, although exhausting and trying for Mother, provided for a lot of lively discussion and a wide range of options and opinions to be explored. And I just have good, fond memories of many fine people that were our guests at the mansion house, and so that's the time that I have most of my early memories. Mother served the Lord diligently throughout her life. Her generosity to take in those in need, to feed and clothe and counsel, was unsurpassed. She believed that truth and right would survive, that error and wrong must perish. She disliked oppression of any kind and found the illumination of truth to serve her very well. So she and her Hale family supported the Underground Railroad to help escape slaves traveling north to Canada. While possibly that's something that has been hidden in history, it is something I'll go into further if we have questions about it. Her second husband, my stepfather, Major Louis Bideman, was a good innovator. He had vision to set up businesses that became profitable after he left. He and his brother had made a set of carriages for father and Uncle Hiram. They were at that time working in Canton, Illinois, downriver. And the foundry that he used for setting up his carriages later got transformed into the McCormick Farm Machine Company, the McCormick Harvesters Company. And unfortunately, he didn't have it long enough to be able to make very much money on it. He did also establish a match manufacturing company, and that one got sucked up into the Diamond Match Company, which by the end of my life had become the largest match company in the United States. He went to California with the 49ers and made a fortune and lost it. He was a good-natured man, and in spite of his vices, I respect him for caring for Mother and her children, as well as his own. In 1847, when they married, with their combined families, there were 14 of us to be fed every day, as well as the visitors. 14 of us for every meal. And he absorbed that issue without complaint and supplied quite adequately. Let me reflect upon some of those early memories. The picture of our house north of the temple in Kirtland reminds me of the first fish I caught. Mother had arranged for, now see, I was born there in Kirtland in 32, and we left in 38, so I could only have been about 5 years old. And she supplied me a stick for a pole with a string, and I think it was a pin that she turned into a bit of a hook. And so I went down to the creek below the temple, below the house, and some unlucky chub hung himself on my hook. I pulled him in and went running up to the house with it to show Mother that I'd caught a fish. I don't recall when she fixed it for me. I don't recall what happened to it. It may be that it was given to Major. Major was the big white dog that had come home with Father after he had made the trip to Independence in 1834. The one's called Zion's Camp. And Major just was one of my best friends, so I'll probably talk about him quite a bit. But Major might have been fed something like that. I'm sorry if the bones were a threat. Anyway, I don't have many memories of Kirtland. I do remember the trip to Far West. We were in a wagon that had a divider, and people could sleep on either side of the divider. But most of the time we were walking, and I was small enough. Well, I was big enough to walk quite a bit, but small enough I got to ride quite a bit as well. I do remember that when we got to Far West, Major apparently got in a fight, his ears got chewed. And when he came home, he lay down, and my little brother, Frederick, proceeded to play with his ears, and Major growled at him. And Father was very much upset and gave Major a lesson that he would never forget. And as a matter of fact, as I recall, Major avoided small children ever after that, although he became my best friend. He was a mastiff. I remember when the soldiers came to take Father to they were going to kill him, but they decided to take him to prison instead. And when we tried to go out and say goodbye, and the soldiers wouldn't let us see Father, he was in a wagon with the canvas. Father was able to get his hand out and underneath the canvas, so we were waving at his hand. That's all we had, and yell at each other. But Major jumped out of the second floor of our little house to be able to follow Father, and we had to bring him back home. Although, if I recall correctly, that would have probably been November of 38. By December of 38, we made a trip to visit Father in prison, and Major stayed with him. And he would have stayed with him through December and January. But then when we left to go to Illinois, he went with us. And so he was a special family companion. I guess maybe I should talk about people instead of the dog, but I would have to acknowledge that Major was one of my best friends, and so was Charlie. Charlie was one of the horses that pulled us out of Missouri, and very interesting. We had 2 black horses to make that exit, and the other horse died on the way across Missouri. And so Charlie ended up having to pull the wagon by himself, with Major walking along in front of him to help guide. And it was interesting to make that trek cold enough that when we got to the Mississippi River, it was frozen there at Quincy, and we had to walk across on the ice. Charlie was pulling the wagon. Major was walking in front of him. I might be able to come up with the names of the gentlemen that had driven us across. I think about it a little bit. I'll come up with that for you. But I do remember that my sister Julie was on the one side of Mother, hanging on to her skirt. I was hanging on the skirt on the other side. Mother was carrying Frederick and Alexander. Alexander was just a baby at the time. And then she had the inspired version of the Bible sewn into her petticoats. And so it was with a prayer and faith that we would not sink. Yet when you're standing on top of the water, gurgling on the Mississippi, when it's frozen with just a few inches underneath your feet, you hear it running, bubbling, creaking, the ice cracks, and you wonder just how are we going to do this? But somehow the Lord blessed us, and we crossed the river on the ice, and we're welcomed into the home of the Clevelands, and we stayed with them for some months. Let me go back to the far west for just a moment, because one interesting memory I have there is of a black man who came to sell watermelons, and he had a team. He had a trio. He had a mare and an ox and a mule, all yoked together to pull a wagon with all of his watermelons on it. Fascinating. I never saw anything like that before nor since. I've seen the big long teams pulling the big wagons across the West, but this was a happy-go-lucky black man with a bunch of watermelons that he was able to sell up far west. But for me, the most memorable thing was to see that remarkable team with an oxen and a mule and a mare all hooked together. I don't have very many memories of far west, and I think that's probably a good thing, because it was only a brief time we were there, less than a year. Anyway, we were staying with the Cleveland family when one of my next memories comes up, because the Huntingtons were neighbors of the Clevelands and near um, Quincy. And Alan Huntington would borrow his father's rifle so we could go hunt rabbits. And that was great fun. I didn't mind being a bird dog. I could help find the rabbits and point them out to him so he could shoot them. But mother thought that was a little bit too dangerous. And so she told me not to do it anymore. Well, I didn't until the next day. But then when I got home and she asked, I told her, yes, I did. And so I got a spanking. And the next day I saw Alan with his father's gun again, and getting rabbits so he had them to eat was pretty good fun. So mother had warned me that if I did it again, she'd spank me harder. But I did it again and she spanked me harder. And the third time it got enough that I said I didn't want to do it anymore. But playing bird dog for Alan Huntington is one of my early memories in Quincy. Another memory that I should share with you, though, is that in Quincy, there was a gentleman who had set up an institute. David Nelson was his name. And he, I believe in about 1836, had set up an institute there because Quincy was right across the river from Missouri, and Missouri had allowed and fostered slaves. And Mr. Nelson was one of those people, one of those ministers of a Protestant denomination that Congregationalist, I believe, or Presbyterian, but he was strongly anti-slave, and he saw the abuse of the black men, and so was trying to educate white people to be missionaries and try to go convert the Missourians. And if in the process of converting the Missourians, we could help the slaves escape to Illinois, then we could help move them out of Illinois all the way up into Canada and let them be free. Well, the Allen County, the county around Quincy, became one of the most significant places for the escaped slaves. And of course, that didn't make the Missourians very happy. But it's interesting to me that well, when we got there were some slaves that were being pushed through the Underground Railroad, but we were Mormons and we were white people. We were not slaves, and so they didn't have to hide us. But nonetheless, the people of Quincy embraced us and took us in and sheltered literally hundreds of us that escaped from Missouri because Governor Boggs had issued an extermination order in October of 1838 to drive us out of the state. And so clearly I had some early inclinations to want to support the oppressed, because we had been there, we had seen it, and we'd been rescued by people who were being kind, taking care of not only us, but also helping Black people just to disperse. And of course, our family, Nauvoo was just not that far north of Quincy, and for Nauvoo residents to become part of the Underground Railroad was natural, especially after the kindness of the good people of Quincy. All right, we got to Nauvoo, and I don't remember much about the early settlement except was a little bit of malaria. In 1840, I remember Grandpa and Grandma had a double log house that was built on the southeast corner of Main and Water Street, across east from the homestead. And Grandpa was sick; he never recovered really from the depredations of Missouri, and he finally died in the fall of 1840. And I remember being chastised by my aunties because I didn't cry. And so I explained that you told me that he's gone to a better place, and he's gone to a better place, then why should we cry? So I was considered cold-hearted and not very sensitive, but To me, it made sense that if he's gone to a better place, we shouldn't be crying for him. I do remember that father was gone quite a lot. He went to Washington, D.C. to appeal for redress. And while he was gone, malaria hit, and quite a bunch of us got laid low with that. Remember that John Huntington made a ground dipper, that gourd dipper, I should say, had a long neck, and that way wouldn't he could put the end of the dipper in his mouth with water, and he wouldn't have to get up. Really a genius. He was one of the brilliant people who I found to be a good friend throughout my early life. We played barn ball together on the east side of the mansion, and I think that's where Llewellyn Marks hit Frederick with a bat. And Frederick cried. I was upset. I decided it might have been an accident, so I didn't do anything about it. But a week later, during our lunch hour, he got hit by a ball that was a wet yarn ball, and so when they're wet, they can sting pretty heavily. But he got hit pretty hard with it and blamed me. So he came after me, and we got in a fight. And as a result, the teacher, Mr. Cole, wanted me to apologize. And so I apologized to the teacher for fighting and breaking the rules of school, but I refused to apologize to Llewellyn Marks because I thought he was in the wrong. And that issue was taken to our fathers. And I was pleased that my father basically sustained me in it because we didn't like the idea of bullies getting away with things. Bullies fundamentally deserve to be confronted. Well, another time that applied was when my little brother Frederick was carrying Jeffrey Kent. Jeffrey was a crippled lad, very small, and so Frederick would carry him. And there were some guys that I think this is when we had the school in the 70s hall, but a bunch of guys proceeded to attack Frederick and Jeffrey, and just knock him down, knock him in the dirt, roll him around a bit, kick him a little bit, no big deal, but the action of a bunch of bullies nonetheless. And Arthur Foster was one of the ringleaders of that bunch, and I remember warning them, saying, "Don't mess with my brother." And Arthur Foster next day messed with my brother. And I had carried an umbrella to school with me that day. It was one of those heavy umbrellas that has the wooden strips along it to hold the fabric, and so pretty heavy, pretty stout. And I whacked him with that thing, probably not quite realizing just how much damage it could do. I could have broken him, but fortunately I broke the umbrella instead. Mother was distressed that I broke her big, beautiful umbrella. Father made inquiry into it. And again, when they discovered it was because I was responding to a bully, then my punishment was very mild. Well, again, let me go back to old Charlie. I think Charlie is one of the interesting parts of my memories because he was a beautiful black horse with a star on his forehead. He had pulled us from Kirtland to Missouri, and then to Quincy, then to Nauvoo, and then after father was assassinated, he pulled it. Well, no, we took the boat, but Lauren Walker drove him up to Fulton, and when we had to go back in February after we heard that the mansion house was being raided by Mr. Van Tile, Charlie put us back down there. But Charlie was my friend, and I couldn't get up on him just on a normal way, but I got up on the fence and then got Charlie over close. I could jump from the fence over onto Charlie. Charlie got smart about that and would lean up against my leg and trap me against the fence. And so I had to borrow a pin, one of those sewing pins from Mother. And when I poked him with that, he'd get off of my leg. But we were good friends and just had a great time together by and large. He was a marvelous horse, and I remember using him to pull water from the river up to feed the animals, and it was on what we call a frog. Such a well, and one of the beautiful things was that Charlie dressed up when Mother rode him, when she put on her gowns to go with Father when he was dressed up as the general, and she was dressed up as his lady with all the plumes and the beautiful hat and everything. Charlie was just he pranced and danced just so beautifully. They just really made a beautiful couple. Yet here he and I were playmates, workmates, and here he was also the remarkable parade master who, well, he got yoked with the governor. Tom Carlin was the name for one of the horses that Father got named after the governor, and so the two of them were yoked together quite a lot. Sometimes he got teamed with another of Father's horses. I'm trying to remember the name, Joe Duncan. That's the one that Brigham Young wanted to borrow so that he could act like Father and go parade in front of people after Father was killed. But and Joe Duncan, if I recall correctly, went to William Coolidge, because after Father was assassinated, Mother had to settle up the estate, and Mr. Coolidge was one of those people that was assigned to help settle up the estate, and for that he was able to take that horse. Horses have become part of the family, dogs become part of the family, and so I guess maybe I spent more time with the dog and the horse than I have with the other people, but you can ask me about that. Let me also, though, mention another very important element in our lives. The Mannings showed up in 1843 in the fall. Jane Manning and her family, I think it was 8 people that she had brought across the Erie Canal, and they had luggage on the canal, but because they were black, when they got off the boat, the luggage was confiscated, and so they ended up walking from the end of the Erie Canal some 800 miles to Nauvoo, and part of this was in the wintertime. So here they were walking in snow, leaving blood tracks behind, and these sad people who had joined the church in the east, but they'd heard that Nauvoo was where Joseph Smith was. They wanted to come meet him, and they wanted to come be part of the kingdom of God. And so they showed up, and here was this remarkable family, Jane and her brother, and then several younger people. And so we got them farmed out in servant jobs, and Jane was accepted in our household as someone to do the sewing and washing and some of the cooking, and her brother did was one of our major cooks. These people became our friends, and well, I remember going to see Isaac probably 1905 or so in Utah, and he testified that your mother was the best woman I ever knew, and if I can quote him, he said, and then was all lies about the prophet Joseph having any other wives but her. He was quite willing to make that kind of a testimony. All right, I'm about done with my childhood memories. Well, I should remember when we were living in the homestead and we were digging the well on the east side of the homestead, and they were using black powder to blast through the limestone. I was standing in the doorway on the east side of the keeping room when the blast went off. About a 20-pound stone came down and brushed my cap, just inches, an inch from in front of my nose, and how close I came to being killed under those circumstances, and yet somehow the Lord had preserved me. I really have to look back at my life and recognize that many times I have been preserved, and I'm happy to be able to come share some of my memories with you. I would remember a little bit of being in the Bailey's Boys troops, but that was a boys militia like the Nauvoo militia, and Mother decided that I probably really didn't belong there, and she was right. I really didn't belong there, but I did I do reflect on it with some concern that people in Nauvoo began to call each other by general and major and whatever their legion name was, rather than brother, sister, or elder. By shifting to military names, it seems to me that was one of the things that was a distractor in the Nauvoo days. I should mention Porter Rockwell. He came back to us from Missouri at Christmas time in 1843. Mother was in St. Louis, and when she got home, there was Porter Rockwell set up with a bar in the southwest corner room, the keeping room. It was also known as the bar room in the house, in the homestead, and the mansion, I mean. And Mother calmly took Father aside and explained to him that she did not think it was appropriate for the bar to be set up in his house when he was the prophet. And she suggested to him that either the bar goes or she would take us children back to the homestead, and he could have his bar in the mansion. So Porter Rockwell and the bar were kicked out, but his bar and barbershop were under construction when Father was assassinated. And it was from that construction that he gave the speech in June to declare martial law. And it was from that same stand that the governor spoke on the day that Father was killed. He was there looking for counterfeit, and that was one of the curious things that people were concerned about in Nauvoo, not everyone was legitimate. Anyway, one of the fun incidents I should remember, we had a bunch of people that came looking for Porter Rockwell, and they wanted Brigham Young, and I think they must have been from Missouri, and I think they wanted to take Porter Rockwell back for assassination attempt. But anyway, these men were mistakenly shown William Miller as Brigham Young. So they arrested William Miller thinking they had Brigham Young. And while they were in Mansion House, carriage came by. A lady got out of the carriage, came in, went upstairs, fussed around a little while, then came back down. I saw her getting into the carriage again. She winked at me. It was Porter Rockwell. And the guys that were trying to arrest him were there in the Mansion House. He had walked by them twice without them recognizing him. And so I always thought that was sort of fun. And again, Porter Rockwell mentioned to me that when my father was killed, he lost the only real friend he ever had. Well, and so I'm talking about my father's death. Let me explain. I was 11 years old, and Father and a bunch of other men had left early in the morning for Carthage. Major jumped from the second story window of the mansion to try to go along, and so I had to try to hold on to his quivering body to keep him at home. The bodies came back the next day, and they were boxed in the southwest corner of the dining room. The vinegar and tar and sugar were put on the stove in the kitchen to cook to hide the odor of death. And I suspect you all had the chance to smell the odor of death. And when it's in a hot June day with temperatures over 90, and you've got the tar and the sugar and the vinegar burning on the stove, it becomes a memory that you cannot hardly ever shake. The following day, the visitors came, paid their respect, and here we're approaching 10,000 people, almost all of them in tears, wanting to pay their respects to my father and his brother. And that evening, then the bodies were taken out of the caskets. Oh, and I should mention that the inconsolable grief of my mother was also one of those memorable things that a young man never can quite get rid of. My mother had lost her husband and his brother, and the church had lost its leader, and I had lost my father, and so had my brothers and sister. And on the 29th, then until 5 p.m., all these people came wandering by. very interesting story since my friend, what is her name? My friend Marietta Hodges was a year younger than me, and she stood in that line and went to see my father and his brother while I think riding on her father's shoulders. And Marietta then later wrote about that and the trump of the people coming from all across the countryside to pay their respects was one of the themes of her message. A beautiful tribute to my father, beautiful young lady whose life deserves far better than what it's gotten, because she was the younger sister of 4 young men who were killed, 2 of them for the murder of a Mennonite gentleman in Iowa, and then one of them in Brigham Young's backyard, and the fourth one disappeared while under the protective custody of Brigham Young's clerk. And so the Hodges family became known as a criminal family. But Marietta became one of the stalwarts of the reorganization. And I think the evidence that showed up in 1910 that that her brothers had been murdered, where actually somebody else, well, someone that they may well have known, who was part of the same gang, had confessed to the murder. And so the idea that her family has been carrying the stigma of criminality, and she lived that down and became one of the mothers of Israel, particularly in Lamoni with, well, she was one of the people who was able to help finish the inspired version of the Bible and get it in print. And so she's one of those people that you might want to bring back to celebrate her life at some point, and because I think that hers is one of those most exemplary lives of the saints that I've had the privilege of knowing. And I think that the evidence that her brothers may not have been as bad at criminals, they may very well have been doing some things they shouldn't have, but I don't think they was as bad as what they got credit for. Means that, well, it means that at this stage, I think I've introduced myself enough, and I'm wanting to yield to your questions. And I understand you have technology by which you can raise your hands, and Sister Luce will act as moderator, and I'll be happy to do my best to answer your questions.
Well, do I get the honor of the first question, Joseph?
Please do.
I had never heard about Vitamin going to the gold fields in 49. Can you tell us any more about that? I mean, at that time, he and Emma were married, right?
Yes.
So how long was he gone, and what happened with this fortune he made?
Major Vitamin was he was a laughable character in some respects. I remember while he was courting Mother, that one day he came to ask her for a date to go to dinner. She was upstairs on the west side of by the stairway in the mansion. I was out in the yard. Major Vitamin came by wearing his top hat and toupee, and proceeded to call out to her. And when he called out to her, he proceeded to bow. And in doing so, he missed the clothesline that was right there. It caught his hat and knocked his hat and toupee off as he bowed. He bowed with his bald head showing. Mother and I both burst into laughter. It was just a really great way to introduce yourself. But anyway, yes, Major Vitamin had, well, he and his brother had provided carriages for Father, and they proceeded to set up business in Nauvoo. And when he married Mother, that was with the Methodist minister in December of 47. And when the news of the gold rush occurred, then he got excited about it, and with a few friends proceeded to take off and go get rich. Well, we do have a number. I mean, I'm confident you might still be able to find some of the letters that were exchanged between my mother and him while he was gone. He was well, I would not call him a faithful gentleman, but he was at least reasonably faithful about writing. But he found that digging for gold was too much work. So he set up a store and proceeded to sell tools to the diggers. And that's the way he made his bunch of money, because they had to give him gold in order to have the shovels and the hoes and the picks and so forth that he was supplying them. So on the way back, apparently he did a little bit of gambling and lost it all. And so, yeah, it was easy come, easy go for him. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, very interesting. Deb, do you want to go ahead and call the questions?
Okay, we have Terry Walker and then Monty. Go ahead, Terry.
Okay, Brother Smith, in the time that you lived in the mansion house, there was a young lady from England came to Nauvoo and started working in the mansion house. She probably was a maid for the hotel. Her name was Eliza Bridget Manwaring. Do you have any recollections of her?
Eliza, give me your last name again, please.
What?
You said her name was Eliza. And this
Eliza Bridget Manwaring. She eventually married my 3 great-grandfather and became my 3 great-grandmother while she was living in the mansion house.
And did they marry in the mansion house too?
I don't know if they were married there or not.
And do you happen to have any clear dates on when she was there?
Not in front of me. I didn't bring it, but I have it. I just don't have it in front of me.
Well, if you understand that Brother DeBarthe is in the process of writing the story of the mansion house, then for anyone like that to be tucked into the timeline and into the contribution would be welcome.
I will get that to you.
I do want to emphasize that Brother DeBarthe did ask for me to emphasize the mysteries of God, which is sort of a theme, as I understand it, that you'll be seeing in your forum in the future. And I would want to emphasize that for me, one of the mysteries is the simple fact that there is a transformation that occurs. You'll notice in my case, I had this terrible experience with Father's death. And then people wanted me to become his successor. And clearly I had no desire whatsoever to replicate and do what my father had done. That is in terms of being killed and being put.
Thank you.
But yeah, I'd be happy to. I'm sorry, I don't happen to remember this name. Eliza clearly is I don't associate it with the right last name, so I apologize. I'm sorry. My memory must have slipped. That's one of those good excuses that you have after 100 years.
Across the street from you lived James Allred, and one of his sons was James T.S. Allred, and that's who she married.
Yes, I do remember the Allreds. Their house was on the corner across from the hotel.
Yes.
Just north of, just across Main Street from the mansion house.
Yes, it was.
James Allred. He's the one I believe that we introduced in the schoolhouse. Oh yeah, you'll appreciate this story if you're a family. He was bigger than most of us, and we had a small basement underneath the long schoolhouse, and this would be just near the homestead. And we had a group of us that formed our own little club, and James already wanted to get into that club, and so we set up an initiation for him. He was just inclined a little bit toward being a bully, and so we decided to retain that. So we of the trapdoor of the basement, blindfolded him, pulled him into the house, had him step in the hole, and he fell into the basement. In the process, he whacked his head on a beam across the floor, and probably pretty well knocked himself out. But he really got upset with us for having damaged him that way. But that was just part of our initiation, because we slammed the door shut. We were dancing like a bunch of Indians on top of his door. Heard his scream. Finally decided maybe we should let him out. But that's just one of those childhood memories. We became friends after that. He became a pretty good actor, and And I remember him as being one of those positive contributors to the community.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Monty, go ahead, please.
Yes, Brother Young, Brother Young, Brother Smith, after your father's death, I understand that Brother Young moved into the family residence. And I was wanting to know how that affected your family, what impact that had on the Smith family.
The relationship between Brigham Young and my mother was not at all good. Immediately after Father's assassination, Brigham Young insisted that the papers and the property that had my father's name on it belonged to him, because he was going to be the new prophet and seer and whoever, and president of the church. The mother recognized that Father had not done a very good job of separating his personal material from that of the church. And so there got to be a significant dispute here. And Brigham Young was successful at gathering quite a lot of papers. He had his own house, but nonetheless, he came and spent several weeks living in the mansion house. And he acquired, when he wanted to go on parade, he acquired Papa's horse and saddle and bridle and sword, so that he could go look like Father and be on the same horse, and so therefore made himself to look like the appropriate successor to my father. Mother didn't like that. Further, Brigham Young had a bunch of men that were watching over the house all the time, and she was encouraged to move out. It was her house. She didn't want to move out, and she was threatened, saying that if you don't move in 3 days, you're going to be burned out. And I remember that night, we had all heard about it. We were quite deeply concerned, but Mother stayed calm. We had our prayers. We all knelt and offered our prayers to God and asked for his protection and grace. And we went to bed. We went to bed, all of us in the same room, so that we would be under Mother's protection. And in the morning, on the north side of the house, you can see where someone had tried to light a fire. The siding was scorched, but the fire didn't catch. And we were protected. Mother was confident that in part because she had the inspired version of the Bible manuscript in a trunk upstairs, and she had our children, that God was protecting us. But she felt like Brigham Young was being very threatening. And then he gave me a gun. He gave me a dueling pistol, a very dangerous little short dueling pistol, and it went off, nearly wounding me, and so it got thrown in the junk pile. And then George, what was his name, also had the gift of one of his close associates who gave me a big Bowie knife. And I took it to Mother so she could use it in the kitchen, big and heavy for her to use in the kitchen. And so I traded to my friend John for a cherry rolling pin, and she treasured that rolling pin for, I think, the rest of her life. And so yeah, sometimes you get good gifts and sometimes you get the other kind, but yeah, the relationship with Brigham Young was just not at all pleasant. Dr. Bernheisel was one of the few people that I know who was able to have a good relationship with both. And he was an extraordinary individual. So I'd much rather talk about Dr. Bernheisel than I would Brigham Young, because my memories are so much more favorable toward the doctor. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Okay, Cynthia, you're next. Go ahead, please.
Okay, I have kind of a two-part thing. One is I'd like to know, how were you as a lawyer, and did you have any special cases or anything? Did you make a living at it?
No, I read law for a couple of years, 1 year in Nauvoo And then Major Biden arranged for me to go spend a year reading in Canton. That would have been about 1855. And that experience, I'm not quite sure how much of this I should reveal to you, but that experience was, well, it influenced me significantly because I became aware that everything follows the law. The natural law of the universe that God has created clearly is significant, but man-made law becomes highly significant as well. And so we need to be tuning ourselves to that. But my experience in going to Canton, by then I had picked up the unfortunate habits of smoking and drinking. And so I partied too much while I was in Canton, and well, it was, I had met my sweetheart before I went there. And I'm going to distract from your question if I may, because I think that it's appropriate to do so. The fact is I never got my degree in law. I read for a couple of years. I'm influenced by it, and some people consider me a legalistic kind of a person. But I had left Emmeline back in Nauvoo. I had met her in the candy store. Frederick and I were had the horse and buggy and went by and saw her, and she was walking home. I told Frederick to get out of the buggy, and so I picked her up and I told him I'm going to marry that girl. It was beautiful. She appealed to me, and so I took her home. Well, then I spent the next year in Canton, and so I have a poem here that I wrote to her. I'll share that with you just because I think it speaks of what was going on in my thinking in preference to. I'm going to have to get my spectacles up here so I can see. But that poem that I wrote to her in 1855 said, "Oh, how pleasant 'tis to think of thee in the still watches of the weary night, where all around seems sleeping save me. 'Tis then thine image rises to my sight, and all my thoughts seem centering on thee. 'Tis often in my spirit dreams I see thee, and ever nearing that calm, peaceful smile. And when in mauling dreams thy form I see, I will ever my sad loneliness beguile, and always in my thoughts repose on thee. I feel that some strange influence held by thee, some closing round me binding chains, and yet it seems those very chains are free, and binding o'er their links there e'er remains an image bright, a counterpart to thee."
That's neat.
Clearly, I was.
I had one more question about, you were married 3 times.
Your question, sister, if you would please, because I really want to give you Emmeline's response.
Oh, okay.
because I think it's special. I still can't get my spectacles arranged here. Let me get Sister DeBarthe to help me. But now my glasses are fogged to the point that I can't see anything anyway. Well, anyway, her response, and I recognize that it's a later response than what I would like to be able to use. Sister, perhaps we can come up with a means of getting the fog off my glasses. Spectacles can be such a problem. That's one of the benefits, though. I'm getting old. You have a chance to see through new lenses. All right. And I recognize that this is years later, but nonetheless, it speaks of the nature of the romance that was developed while I was in Canton. She wrote to me saying, and she would have been pregnant with Joseph Arthur at this time. "It is a quiet summer's day. I dream while gazing in the sky, bright dreams that quickly speed away and leave fond hopes that droop and die. On the wall I see a face that mildly looks on me, and round that sainted forehead trace the emblems of eternity." island. The sunbeams cast a ray, which floating through my lonely room dissolves the clouds of somber gray, moves hastily its silent gloom. I listen as I hear again a voice which echoes to mine own, borne onward in a sweet refrain, and am content with this alone. I clasp the picture to my breast. The voice and sunshine all are fled. My heart is soothed to quiet rest. In prayer, I humbly bow my head. If you can appreciate the change, then you can appreciate why there was something more important in my life than studying law. All right, you have another
Well,
question.
okay, yes. I thought you were married 3 times to Emmeline, once to Bertha, and then Ada, but you said there were 4 wives. How many children did you have?
Okay, I had 3 wives. Emmeline was first. With her,
Bertha,
let me just trace through so you'll have the whole story. Emmeline, her parents did not approve of the wedding. They did not approve of the marriage, and as a result, there was just a good deal of stress there. Finally, part of it was the fact that Frederick and I had been farming, and we ended up with 5 years of crop failure, and so I was economically in the hole, and not prospering very well at the time that I asked for her hand. I Joseph, Mormon prophet, and the Griswolds were not that fond of the Mormons, and so they disowned her when I married her. So she chose me, and so it was well, we married in what was it? It was 1856. We got married, and we had Emma Josepha in 1857. We had Eva Rebecca in 1859. Eva was the first that really challenged me. This was at the time that I was contemplating about joining one of the Restoration churches. And Eva was this beautiful little girl who got sick, and the doctor came and gave her an adult dose of medicine, and she died. And I could not keep myself from blaming the doctor for killing my little girl. I carried that very deep pain. And here I was trying to make career decisions about the church, and I asked God, what's going on here? Why am I experiencing economic disaster, and I'll get hit this as well? And here this little girl was only 8 months old, and she died. But we ended up having to recognize that we still had a little girl, and so we took care of that little girl. And in 61, then we had Carrie Lucinda. And then Zaida, and that was 1863, and Joseph Arthur in 1865. And again, he died that same year. And so here, two of the first 5 children with Emmeline did not make it out of the first year, and then the 6th one was stillborn, and she never recovered. So Emmeline died some months after, or some weeks after, giving birth to a male child that was lost in a miscarriage in 1868, and she died then in 1869. I had these three little girls then, and I needed help. Bertha Medicine came to help, and people began to wag their tongues about the relationship of this lady that was taking care of my children and living under the same roof. And so it was just a matter of a few months. I hadn't been given the respect of a year of mourning for the loss of my wife. And here were all these gossipy rumors about what was going on between Bertha and myself. And I got home one day and Bertha was crying and found out that she had been hearing these rumors and was deeply distressed. And so November 12, 1869, we married. And we went 26 years without ever having a serious argument. And we had 9 children. And David Carlos, again, I sharing the sad part here. David Carlos lived 15 years, was always a bit sick, and he went on the other side of the veil at age 15. And then we had Mary Adentia, also born in Plano. Frederick Madison, born in Plano. Israel, also born in Plano, that was 1876. We had Kenneth, who was born and died in Plano. And then Bertha Azuba, who was born in 1878 in Plano. And this one, this beautiful little girl was 5 years old. She was at school playing on the playground, and a lad swung the baseball bat and hit her in the head and killed her the day before her birthday. How do you deal with that, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters? We believe in a God of love, and yet so much of life is grief. Here I'm telling you how many of my children, 7 of my children, did not make it to maturity. And the genetics to survive, but in response to Azuba's death, I was praying to God, and He gave me these words: "Tenderly, tenderly lead thou me onward the way where my Savior hath gone. Bright on his pathway the sunlight hath shone. Tenderly, tenderly lead thou me on. Close to his hand I so tremblingly clung. Faint were the songs I so doubtfully clung. Brokenly falling from faltering tongue. Tenderly, tenderly thou me on. Faithfully holding my hand, on the rough slippery heights safely I stand, looking away to the heavenly strand. Tenderly, tenderly leads me on. Now has my weak heart grown trustingly strong. Ways have grown short that seemed once too long. Gladly I join in the triumphant song. Tenderly, tenderly lead me on. So even out of disaster, there's a transforming power, which is one of the mysteries of God that helps us to survive. I'm not sure. Did I get your question answered, Sister Cindy?
Oh, well, but you haven't touched data.
Okay, well, I indicated we had 9 children. One more of those blossomed. She was born and died as a baby in Lamoni. And then I married Ada in, let me explain about Bertha. Bertha was just a tremendous helpmate. She, for a honeymoon, we went to a church camp, to a reunion. She just loved the saints and she was happy to have all kinds of fellowship with the saints. And she's just an amazing person all around. She's really quite a good businesswoman, and she got hens to lay eggs and supplied those and sold them. But anyway, she was coming back from a business engagement and driving the horses as they came in the driveway at Liberty Hall. and something spooked the horses, and she fell and got badly injured, and struggled along for a couple of weeks, and then died. And my daughter Adentia moved in with her husband to help take care of the younger kids. And I happened to meet Ada when I went to Canada and asked for her hand in marriage. And her father thought I was pretty old for her, since, well, she was 26 and I was 65. But he accepted, and we had Richard in 1898, and William Wallace in 1900, and Reginald in 1903. And so those three all survived. Unfortunately, I didn't get to live long enough to see them to adulthood, but I've been richly blessed with offspring that are remarkably gifted, intelligent, and hopefully you've seen that in their, and maybe you want to invite them back individually, because many of them, I think, are worth a press conference as well. Now then, Sister Cindy, did I get your questions satisfactorily addressed?
I think she stepped away. Oh, there she is.
Okay.
Okay, Carol. Carol, it's your turn.
Thank you. Am I coming across?
Yep.
Okay, great. I have two questions. And first of all, thank you so much for sharing such an extensive knowledge of Joseph III. He's one of my favorite characters in the history of the churches. I want to ask about this Manning family. Is this the same person that helped lay to rest Joseph Jr. when he passed away and hid him in the first grave? Is this the same former slave, I think is what they said? And
Yes. Now, that experience, let me explain about that, because I suspect that was done under mysterious circumstances and therefore deserves a little bit of clarification. When Joseph and Hiram were initially laid to rest, the coffins were carried up to the funeral site up across from the temple, where the coffins were filled with sand, and the bodies were actually buried in the basement of the Nauvoo house, which is under construction. That night, a big rainstorm came in with lots of thunder and lightning and heavy rain, and it washed away all traces of where they dug up the basement to bury those bodies. Where bodies decay and they go through a decaying process that leaves an awful lot of odor. Fortunately, we didn't get much of a bother from that, not enough to detect where the bodies had been. But I think it was January following. See, that would have been June, late June, when they were buried in the basement of the Nauvoo house. It was January following when Mother became suspicious. There were people that wanted to steal the bodies. I need to explain that, I guess. People wanted to steal the bodies. There was somebody that had, I think, offered $500 for Joseph Smith's head. So he used it for an ashtray or something. And so Mother knew very well that she had to be careful about the bodies. There were still those Missourians that were anxious to take the bodies and claim dead or alive these criminals that certain people were waiting to give a prize for. Well, when the bodies were dug up then and moved over to the basement of the B house, then I saw them and I collected a clipping of hair from my father. And it was long enough after that burial that there was not much odor. Bodies had shrunk back down to the skin on the bones. And so I was able to get the hair clipping, and that went into a brooch that Mother wore then the rest of her life. I presume it's to some extent. Yes, and the Huntington brothers.
DeBarthe is playing Joseph Smith III tonight, telling stories.
Ones that helped Mother with that reburial, but I think Manning was the gentleman who did most of the heavy work.
Okay. My other question was, you mentioned that Emma crossed near Quincy, Illinois, with the scriptures sewn into her petticoats. I thought they landed or came near Montrose, Iowa. Is that correct?
That's quite a lot later. Okay. The experience, Montrose is just across the river west of Nauvoo.
I know. I used to play there.
So our experience with Montrose, the significant memory I have there is that in April 4 of 1860, I didn't get into this, and this is a story that I should be telling, I'm sure. Okay, I had been struggling. I told you that I spent 1855 studying to be a lawyer. And about 1853, I had the experience of being awakened to the possibility that I should be looking at other career possibilities because I had a vision. In that vision, I saw myself standing over an urban center, a city where people were all busy running and hurrying and prospering, clearly all kinds of excitement going on and a good deal of prosperity. And I saw myself standing, looking out across a prairie, a small village and farmhouses and people industriously working together. And it looked like a very pleasant, quiet, happy bunch of people. And then I became aware that there was someone standing beside me, and he told me, "You must make the choice. You have to choose between the busy life in the urban center or the quiet life in the countryside, where you probably will not be very much renowned, but you'll live in peace and harmony." That vision in 1853 ultimately came true when I saw myself in the Herald House in Lamoni. Looking out the west window of the Herald House, I saw that I was looking over those same hills and that same village with the farmhouses and the people living together in peace. In the meantime, you see, I had to struggle on the question of whether I should go into business, go into law, or something else. I had several visits from people who wanted me to go to Utah and pick up my father's mantle there. I had visits from a number of James Strang came to see us when we were in Fulton, and William March joined him, but he came to mother and asked her to associate with his fellowship, and she told him that she was not going to, nor was she going to have any of her children do so, not to any of the organizations of Mormonism, and that would have been 1847, because it was during shortly after the Battle of Nauvoo, or 47, 46 maybe. Anyway, back at the Battle of Nauvoo is when we went up to Fulton, and that's when James Strang came by. We had a visit from an agent of Charles Thompson, who became rather insulting, and so I told him, "You give me a curse, and you need to understand that chickens come home to roost, and you need to go take care of your own family." And so that was the Benimi people, and I again had shaken that one off. So I had numerous options to join with various groups. Well, Uncle William had been with Strang, and then he went down to establish his own church down in Cincinnati area. That's very associated with Isaac Sheen. Isaac Sheen was one of the main people on the Underground Railroad. Isaac Sheen went so far as to advertise in the newspaper that he wanted a black woman to marry him, so they could demonstrate the fact that this was a legitimate kind of a thing to do. And if you can imagine, that was not very well received, and no black woman did marry him. Matter of fact, he ended up marrying Drusilla Babbitt, and her brother came by he was the Indian agent for Brigham Young in Utah, and he came by and tried to convince mother to go to Utah, and he assured her that that they would make us impoverished until we came. And mother told him, "There's no matter how poor you make us, I would never provide any allegiance to Brigham Young." Anyway, so pretty strong antipathy there. And he was then killed as he was traveling, and there was a high level of suspicion that he had been seeking opposition to the bureaucracy in Utah. And so the question of what kind of Indians killed him was a question that traveled back to Nauvoo. Her other brother then settled at Stewartsville, Missouri, and became a member of the RLDS Church. But I'm getting distracted because I should be talking about William, my uncle. He and Isaac then were involved in the Underground Railroad, and Isaac had actually taken one escaped slave all the way to Canada, hiked with him all the way in order to be able to get him out safely. So he was that adamant about being the member of the Underground Railroad. And mother, I think it was a member of the Hale family that lived in Palestine, Illinois, and that became a stopping ground on the Underground Railroad. Let me explain that just a bit, because see, that family had a house with a hole in the living room floor covered with a rug. And so when slaves came, they would take the rug up, open the door, put the slaves underneath, and that way when the sheriff showed up looking for them, they clearly didn't have any slaves in their house. And so this was one rather common kind of things that our good Mormon people did in those early days, helping people to escape. And again, I'm hearkening back to the influence of the good people of Quincy, but let me add one more, because I had the privilege as a young man, about 14 years old, of giving a tour of Mr. Lovejoy. This was Elijah Lovejoy's brother. Elijah was the editor of the newspaper in Alton, Missouri, in Alton, Illinois, who had published his observations about seeing a free black man be captured in Missouri and taken back into slavery. And then he also saw a black man who got captured and burned alive. And so his newspaper was just really hitting hard. And so somebody shot and killed him. Elijah Lovejoy's brother then came to Nauvoo, and I got to give him a tour of our homes and we had a breakdown in the process, and so I stopped and pulled some wire off the fence, fixed the chair, the wagon, and we were able to go on. And so I got a nice compliment from Mr. Lovejoy, and I really did appreciate the fact that his family was very much involved in trying to help people escape slavery. That, I think, is a very important aspect of life. And while the Civil War presumably has ended it, the fact that people still remain people enslaved is a sad comment. I'm sorry, I'm so far away from your question now. I need to invite you to come bring me back to it.
Montrose, isn't that where they came to shore after escaping Nauvoo? Wasn't that where you and your mother and your brothers and sisters came to shore? You came to Montrose?
We're talking about two different times. They come to shore when we left Missouri in 1838.
Oh, okay.
The extermination order. Father was in prison in Liberty, and he had been there since November. And so the end of January, we spent 2 weeks going across Missouri in the cold. It was so cold that the river froze. And so we crossed into Quincy and stayed in Quincy then for the next few months till Father got out of prison. And then we went up to Nauvoo, or to Commerce, which we renamed Nauvoo. In 1860 then, Mother and I had been trying to decide what to do about the various churches, and I had the remarkable experience of the new organization, deciding to make a major push for it. I guess that's the way to say it. Anyway, the new organization had been started in 1852. Let me see if I can get my thinking squared away here. I think it was 1852 that that we had Briggs and Gurley. Let me put my thinking hat on the right place here. Briggs and Gurley had been setting up their own churches in Wisconsin and northern Illinois, and came about a prayer that they very much wanted to be able to get the people gathered together again, and they wanted me to become their leader. The new organization actually, Jason Briggs in 1851 had a revelation, and he wrote it up and sent it around to share with a few people. And in that he said, "In my own due time, the seed of Joseph will come forth mighty and strong to lead." I was the seed of Joseph that they were looking to. And so Zenas Gurley read that, and he confirmed it in 1852. And well, he prayed about it, and as I got the story, he was uncertain, but then he heard that his daughter was speaking and singing in tongues in a congregation in Wisconsin, and so took that as a sign that this was the right thing, and so they proceeded to form the new organization. And along about this time, I was getting the visitors from Utah, inviting me to go west. I had the good friends, the Yates, were farming companions, not Mormons, but they very much encouraged me to go west because I'd make a lot of money if I could convert all those Mormons, and it'd be fun to have an extra wife or two anyway. But then in 1856, Samuel Gurley and Edmund Briggs came to pay a visit, and they had a letter with them that they read to me, and it offended me because they clearly were telling me that God was saying I should go become their leader, and I wasn't ready to do that. I told them I'd carry on a conversation with them about anything but religion. And I just about had to kick him out of the house. But Sam Gurley got a little bit angry with me, and we didn't get along very well. On the other hand, Ed Briggs decided to stay. He stayed in Nauvoo for most of a year, and we had extended conversations. He knew enough about my father's teachings to give me an update on that, and so that proved to be a very significant factor. I had been with Justice of the Peace in Nauvoo. I had been studying to become a lawyer. I had the opportunity then there to consider to join the new organization. Of course, in 1856, I married Ellaline. You might appreciate that. And I also got to hear Abe Lincoln and the gentleman, he was Douglas. Both of them came to Carthage, and I got to hear both of them speak. Sort of funny because Douglas was drunk and made no sense. And then got up, started to speak, and he was hunched under, and he stood up straight, and somebody had arranged for a bunch of branches to be providing shade over him. But when he stood up, his head stuck all the way through the branches. And everybody laughed, and he offered one of the most eloquent speeches that you ever heard. And so I became an Abe Lincoln supporter, because after all, he was doing what he could to end slavery. Anyway, that would have been about 1858. One more little story, because I had Briggs and Gurley stop by the mansion in 1859. They were going west to speak to the people in Council Bluffs, the people that they thought belonged in the new organization. And they were planning to go down the river. They take the river across the Missouri up to Council Bluffs. And they got to the mansion house and stayed there. And Major Bynum said, "Hey, you guys haven't paid for the board and rent that I'm due from the people that have been here before." And so by the time they had him paid off, they couldn't take the steamer. So they ended up walking across southern Iowa And in the process, they connected with all those people that had dropped out of the Mormon Expedition West. And so there are just numerous groups, Pleasanton and Afton and Council Grove and so forth, where they met people that were part of that then became part of the new organization. So interesting how the Lord is able to use strange things to be able to accomplish his purposes. So anyway, I had this decision to make. I consulted with Major Bideman. He said, get your law degree and make some money. I consulted with Alexander and Frederick, and they both said, get your law degree and make some money. Consulted with David and Mother, and they said, go join the new organization. You have a call to be the prophet. I listened, I prayed, I asked the Lord to tell me what to do, and I felt the invitation that we should respond to the invitation to go to Amboy. And so April 4th of 1860, we got in a rowboat and there was a storm. And we were rowed across the Mississippi to Montrose. Here, I think, is the near disaster that you probably were speaking of. But we had to go there in order to get the train to go up to Amboy, where we got there in the evening and they're having a prayer meeting. We walked in and sat in the back. At the end of that prayer meeting, I believe it was Brother Gurley who introduced us. Cried. They were praying for me. Come and leave them. What kind of world is this? I had seen my father dead. His odor is being hidden by burning tar and vinegar and sugar. And they wanted me to be his successor. The next day, we had a business meeting. And Marcus said, we've had enough of man-made prophets. We don't want any more of that kind. If God has called you, we want to know it. If he has, the church is ready to sustain you. If not, we want nothing to do with you. William Marks was somebody who didn't spare his words much. But anyway, I was invited to speak, and I ended up saying, I've come here not to be dictated by any man or set of men. I've come in response to a power not my own, and I shall be dictated by the power that sent me. And the Spirit has moved me, encouraged me to follow the footsteps of my father, to lead this people, if you'll have me, with all my deficiencies. And if the same Spirit that prompts my coming prompts also my reception, I am with you. And they then proceeded. Isaac Sheen moved to that Mother and I be accepted on original baptism. They moved that I should be ordained, and Gurley and Marks and Powers and Blair ordained me to be the president of prophets of this new organization. And it's been 54 years that position. And I shared with you the experience of looking at Lamoni, seeing that the vision that I'd had when in 1853 had come true. And I hope I got to the question that you were asking, because that's as close as I can come to it. Nearly catastrophic time getting across to Montrose.
Thank you. Very, very good. Thank you.
Okay, Rick, thank you so much for your patience. It's your turn, please.
That's all right. I like to hear the answers to other people's questions too. Well, Joseph, it's been great hearing about your life. I wonder, as you were growing up, if you had read this book that your father miraculously translated, and if you had received a testimony of its truthfulness. And I would imagine it would be hard to lead a church that had the book, this book of and as a prominent scripture, how did you relate to the Book of Mormon?
Thank you, sir, for that excellent question, Brother Ignacic. I think that that is just really a very pivotal, probably one of the primary reasons why I've been invited here. As a child, I read voraciously, but I like to read the kinds of things that were more fun. We read the Bible a little bit every day. That was just one of our regular, and sometimes we read the Book of Mormon instead of the Bible. But for example, Father had the Stevens and Catherwood set on the explorations of Mexico. Fascinating book, a set of books. Bancroft's history fascinated me. I really enjoyed history, and while I was, we didn't have a very big library. The library that Father had, he donated to the Nauvoo Library, and then we had a few other books that became available. Dr. Bernheisel supplied me with quite a lot of reading material. He did that even after he left. He was such a gentleman. When he left in 1847, I remember he wrote a letter to Mother thanking the family for taking him in as a member of the family for those, what was it, nearly 5 years that he lived with us. And well, he was the one who had stayed in the mansion while we were gone to Fulton, and wrote to warn us that Mr. Van Tuyl was selling off our furniture, and time for us to hurry back and try to save our investment. But anyway, his contribution to books became a very important part of my overall education. And so when he was going back and forth from Utah to Washington, he would either drop by and bring books, or sometimes send them in the mail for me, just so that I could be aware of what was going on in terms of governmental issues and so forth. In terms of your question, it wasn't until after I had the vision in 1853 that I really began to study with any seriousness. Probably better to say 1856. By the time I really read the Book of Mormon thoroughly and began to try to understand the teachings of my father. Yes, as a matter of fact, it would have been that visit with Gurley and Briggs that inspired that. And as I began this evening, that first verse caught my attention, where I had been raised by a good mother and father who taught me in the mysteries of God. And it's those mysteries that bring me back again tonight. So many mysteries of God that we need to learn about. Time. What a fascinating mystery time is. Transformation, that's the one I came to speak with you about this evening. Look how I was transformed from a boy who never wanted to be involved in anything that was like what had happened to his father, to proving to claim to be his successor for 54 years. The Book of Mormon, to me, is scripture. It is part of God's law that he wants people to respond to his son. And the Book of Mormon is the story of his son speaking to his people. Now, we don't know exactly where those people were or who they were, yet he said, other people are not in this fold, and I have been to see some of those. I'm going to see some. And so the fact that he is concerned about all people means that here we're dealing, I believe, with another of those laws of the divine. Mystery, yes, but a law too, for I believe most everything in the world functions on the basis of divine law. Now, wow, the nature of your question suggests there may be something more I need to address, but I'm not sure what it is. So if you'd like to clarify, please let me have another chance.
I was just wondering if you, Joseph, had ever made a statement about your reading the Book of Mormon and what it meant to you.
I can give you a quote or two. Actually, when I accepted the leadership of the new organization, I explained to him then that we would hold the Bible, the Book of Mormon, and the Doctrine and Covenants as scripture. Because, well, as my mother taught, those things which are true are the things that we should believe in. And I believe those things are true. We have to live according to the principles that Jesus Christ taught, and he was a great lawgiver. He was helping to develop human character. It is a principle in civil law and ought to be in the ecclesiastical law as well, that the principles of faith which are being promulgated from the pulpit become fundamentally the institution of that corporation, of that corporate body. And so I've encouraged my people, my ministers, my brothers, and my sisters to share the message of the Book of Mormon, because I believe it shares the law of God. It invites us to be people of peace. It tells the story of people who are dysfunctional. They do not get along well together. It's a family that kills each other off. And yet, when they learn the message of Jesus, they can learn to live harmoniously. And that, I think, is an allegory of the whole human family. All of us need to learn together to live together harmoniously. I'm a bit of a moderator. In moderation, I believe in pragmatism, and so I think the scriptures support that. And so, if hopefully that addresses your question more effectively.
Yes, thank you. I didn't realize that Joseph had such a hard life. I don't know. It seems like people, you in the past, have we look back on the lives and thinking how much loss and tragedy they had and still persevered. I mean, with the way they traveled and the way their children died and all the hardships that I don't know that my generation could do those things. You know, take away our devices called the cell phone and we can't function.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have a chance to see these extraordinary devices. For me, the remarkable device was the train, because trains generally allowed ministers to travel for free. And so I was once the train. Well, actually, I helped to lay the foundation for a train, trying to build one to Nauvoo, and the company I was working with went bankrupt. And so after I had built a few miles of it, this is when I was quite young, of course, but nonetheless, I really did believe in the trains. And so when we crossed the river to Montrose, we were able to get on the train and go north or south or west. And so for trips to Utah, for example, once the spike was driven, then we were able to go all the way to the Pacific on the train. And so I was able to send my brother Alexander that way and make the trip a couple of times myself. But yeah, in Lamoni, for example, when we had the Order of Enoch establishing Lamoni, and that's an interesting story if anybody wants to get into it. But we had the train route changed. I think it was Elijah Banta went to the train people and explained to them that if they would swing the route from Mount Air down to Lamoni and back up to Leon, that they would build a town there for it. And they did. And that's where Lamoni got on the train tracks, because they built the train actually as a means of bringing in materials for building the town.
How old were you, Joseph? How old were you, Joseph, when your dad was assassinated?
11 years old.
11?
Yes. Sister DeBarthe raised her hand over here.
My question to you is, I know you were 11 at that time, but your uncle, Samuel, had to go get your dad and his brother's bodies. What happened to his bodyguards the Legion, the Nauvoo Legion, how come they did not go after his body? There is a big legion. If I remember seeing the picture right there in Nauvoo, right in front of the mansion house, there's a huge legion. And they could have gone to go, get the body. But instead, your Uncle Samuel had to go by himself, and people were coming after him, if I recall the story. And because of that, he became sick. Is that correct?
Yes, that is quite correct. Let me explain just a bit. The Nauvoo militia had been disbanded,
Militia.
and the governor had ordered the state weapons to be confiscated, which took probably a third of the weapons of the militia. And because the militia had been disbanded, and father had earlier asked people to defend their wives and families to the death, but when they had lost many of their arms, and the governor said, "Hold on, I've got them under protective custody," then when they were killed, the leadership in Nauvoo was just stymied, and so it was Uncle Samuel that went after the bodies. It was interesting that Uncle Samuel then died just a month later,
Mhm.
and Uncle William, it's an interesting story. I think that Uncle William was in the East, and he had baptized and ordained Black people, and that became one of the reasons that he got kicked out of the Quorum of 12, because some of the people there were more prejudiced and did not think that we ought to be ordaining Black people. But Uncle William came back to Nauvoo, and his wife, Caroline, had been very ill. She had swollen legs. Her legs were so badly swollen that in the previous year, someone had, I'm not sure that's correct, but I've been told that they drained they drained 50 gallons of fluid off of her legs. And she died just a couple of days after they got to the mansion house in May of 1845. And he then claimed his patriarchal role, since my grandfather had been the patriarch, then Uncle Hiram had been patriarch, then William thought he should be the patriarch, and so he was ordained by Brigham and his group to be the patriarch. Brigham then insisted that he needed to take additional wives, and so he did for a while, but then they got in disagreement because Uncle William thought that as patriarch, he should be leader of the church. And Brigham didn't tolerate that, so excommunicated him. And so Uncle William then went to Strang and became patriarch of the Strang group for a while. And that didn't last too long. And then he went down in the South to become leader of his own church. He was tied together with Lyman White, who set up the church in Texas. But it's interesting, Uncle William was convinced that Samuel had been poisoned, because Samuel had gotten sick after delivering the bodies and never recovered. And Hosea Stout was Brigham Young's friend and assistant, and Dr. Stout administered white powder to him until Uncle Samuel died. The white powder was probably arsenic. It was used as a medicine, but the extent to which you administer it will really make a difference in a person's well-being. And so Uncle William thought that Brigham Young had tried to eliminate the possible competition in the family so that he could become the leader. Now then, I'm not sure if I got to your question, sister.
I think you answered it because they didn't have the gun, they were taken away. And
that's a
but
partial explanation.
his bodyguards, like Porter, what is it?
Porter Rockwell.
Rockwell, he's not around, or
Porter
he could have volunteered. People could have volunteered to go and get the body. And here just one person, and they could have killed him, like they were saying that he had to escape from them.
Puerto Rico was still evading the law. And shortly afterwards, he was arrested for murdering a sheriff. And that was in Illinois. But then because it was self-defense, then he got off. So the question of that there got to be a lot of tension in Illinois between Mormons and non-Mormons over legal process. And as I look back upon it, having had a little bit of legal training, and I can appreciate some of the controversy, some of the disagreement that we had.
Okay.
Thank you for your question. Any others?
I'm not seeing any other.
Well, it's been a real pleasure for me to have a chance to come and share with you this evening. I appreciate the invitation. I appreciate the good questions. I appreciate that we've been at it for quite a while, but still quite a few of you that haven't asked any questions, and I certainly would be happy to yield.
Hey, Joseph, where were you when your dad was killed? Were you in the same town?
No, he was in Carthage. We were in Nauvoo. And he had been with us, well, he actually in 1842, he spent much of that year in hiding because Missourians were after him to arrest him for the attempted murder of Governor Boggs. But when that finally got largely resolved, then he was able to proceed with his ministerial duties, and yet there was still this ongoing tension because Nauvoo City Charter had the opportunity to provide the writ of habeas corpus. That meant that well, actually, it probably got used and abused in Nauvoo, but the habeas corpus provided an outlet for the city to get people off, get people acquitted if there was no body available to speak against them. And so numerous cases came up that, as you look back in history, would be a bit questionable, I think. And it's clear that there were some abuses on the Mormon side, including some abuses on the Illinois side. But the simple fact that father had been exploring options of going to Texas. Actually, we had a proposal to go to Texas and provide a buffer between Texas and Mexico. And that proposal was one that father was considering. That I think was inspired by Dr. Bernheisel, who had set up Stephen Austin for colonizing Texas. And here he was living with us, and so he and father had lots of conversations. I got to hear some of those conversations as well. And so yes, Texas looked quite inviting. And so Lyman White took a couple hundred people to Texas and established the church there after father's death. But the idea that we could actually establish a buffer zone between Texas and Mexico, the map that was designed on that would have given the Mormon settlement the western half of Texas, and the southern portion as well. And so that would have been a major acquisition that had been worked out. But Brigham Young took people to Salt Lake City. Strang took people to Michigan. Lyman White took a small group to Texas, and Stephen Austin died prematurely. And Mr. Houston did some negotiating with father's emissaries, but did not ever come to a political agreement. Again, I'm sorry if I missed the question.
No, I just wanted to know if you were in the same town at the time that your father was shot.
No.
And you said he was in Carthage and you were in Nauvoo.
That's right.
By the way,
Or the other way around. No, that's the way. Yeah.
Yeah, he was being held in the Carthage under protective custody in the Carthage jail, and we were in the Mansion House in Nauvoo. We used the Mansion House as a hotel hostelry, and so we had servants helping to prepare meals, and And typically our dining room was crowded night, every morning, noon, and night. And there was a lot of people wanting to come see the prophet. My mother complained that my father couldn't do any work in the garden because if he got a hoe and went to the garden, it would be a matter of minutes before there'd be 6 people tromping on what he was hoeing up.
Another set of plates.
Well, and it became true for me as well to some extent, because by the time we settled in Liberty Hall, I enjoyed the garden, I enjoyed the apple trees, but it was frequent that I would be working in the garden and there came somebody that had to visit. And clearly church business got priority. It appears that our congregation has found ways to find the door and go away. So I presume that means I've worn out my welcome. But I would still be happy to stay and respond to any further questions. Brother Cook, perhaps you'd like to moderate?
Yeah, I think, did Deb leave so she can get up at 5 o'clock, I think.
Wow.
Yeah, she left the message in the chat.
Yeah, I think I saw. Yep. Well, let me get the gallery up and see, is there anybody who has a question or would like to speak?
I just want to thank Paul for the things. I learned several things tonight that I didn't have any idea about. And thank you for sharing with us. It was, I enjoyed it.
Thank you, Sister Cindy. It's gratifying to hear.
And Paul, this is Steve Smith in Lamoni. I thank you. Appreciate it. Appreciate all the stories you told.
Oh, life is quite a story, isn't it? And all of us have a story to tell, and we need to share the story of what God is doing in our lives with the people around us and let them be influenced. One of the great mysteries of God is time. And we learn a lot more about time once we pass through the veil. We learn a lot more about the mysteries. And I assure you that eternity is a marvelous blessing. And so live your lives to make it part of your story.
Carol? Carol, did you want?
Can you hear me? There.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask about your book, Joseph Smith III Memoirs. Do you appreciate that book? And I'm not even sure who wrote it. I did read it, but it's been a long time.
Well, I spent a lot of time with my Israel A in getting that compiled, and my daughter Densha. And so they were very kind to spend a lot of time in the last years of my life to get as much of that compiled. And basically, we put together Herald articles to tell my story so that they could be compiled. And I'm gratified that you've been able to get access to it. I would hope it would still be available.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
So, Joseph, would you be willing to step aside and let Brother DeBarthe tell us about his work on a book about the Mansion House?
I'm happy to yield because it's such a privilege to be invited in the first place, to be able to yield and give Brother DeBarthe a chance to speak is clearly in order. And so what question do you have about the Mansion House?
Would you tell us about your progress on a book about the Mansion House and what the scope of it is?
Well, the scope at this stage is over 200 pages of timeline. the scope is attempting to pull together all those stories about the mansion house, the people that, one of the interesting parts to me is the kids of the mansion house. I mentioned that when Major Bideman and Emma got married, they were feeding 14 people every meal. That's just with the regulars in the family. That was Major Bideman's children and Emma's children. Plus they had 2 little boys that had been adopted by Emma because their mother had been shot and killed by their father accidentally. And then there was Aunt Jane and her 2 boys. She was one of the black ladies. And one of those boys then shortly became a cook and took off on a riverboat. But the little guy became the errand boy for Major Bideman. And so, yeah, yeah, it was a fascinating bunch of people that became the kids of the mansion house. The mansion house was initially the prophet's house. That's what it was known as. And then when they added the hotel wing, it became the Nauvoo Hotel. But when they put the signpost out, it was the Nauvoo Mansion. And so when they leased it to Robinson in January of 1844, it became the Mansion House. And so all these names tend to be a bit confusing, but the Prophet's House is basically what we have standing today. In 1890, the hotel was taken down. Alexander had the hotel wing, and it had fallen. What had happened is that the roof on the north side didn't have very much slope. And the shingles got bad. It leaked. The little bedrooms on the upper floor took the damage, and it ultimately got so bad that they propped up a beam in the basement on stone on bricks and on the basement floor. I found those when I did the dig there, and so they clearly had to leave that post holding the house up while they were taking the bricks out of the basement in 1890. So that wing got taken down. Unfortunately, it should have been preserved because the foundation for the hotel wing was much better than the foundation for the mansion house. Mansion house had an 18-inch brick foundation. The hotel wing under the hotel goes down for the whole basement, so you got this limestone wall with brick on top of it to look uniform with the mansion itself. And so the mansion house has really gone through a fascinating story by itself, but I'm attempting to pull that story together. I'd like to see it reconstructed. I'd like to see people going to the mansion house for dinner, perhaps even spend the night. I'd like to see them entertained by people who play Joseph and Emma, and maybe other people in the family or other people in the community. Let it be used for those high dollar events where people can celebrate history by dressing up in historic costume and coming and sharing a historic meal on plates that are authentic, with silverware that's authentic, with a meal that is authentic. I think that'd be neat and fun. I think it ought to be done.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, in terms of the book, I'm on the 4th draft, and when I went to Nauvoo for the dig this spring, it was over 600 pages. And so the editors are chewing on it, and I'm continuing to rewrite, so it'll be a while yet because it's just so much of a story to be told. David Smith is part of that story. And, you know, that's where Albert Smith was born. David had gone to Utah on a mission. He came back, he got sick, and he ended up spending the last 30 some years of his life in a mental institution at Elgin. So sad. I am reasonably well convinced that came about because of the construction of the mansion house. Because when I go through the construction materials, I find that there are a dozen kegs of lead that they mixed into the paint. And all that lead mixed into the paint. And this little guy that came home or was born there, grew up there, undoubtedly scratched the walls and licked his fingers. I'm confident that the lead poisoning was a factor in his mental disability, and he was not one of those people who spent all his time outdoors, although he did spend some time out there, but he was more of a housebound child, sick much of the time. Whereas Alexander and Joseph were out hunting. Alexander was known as the best shot in the county. And they had 2 matches that came to the point where they didn't allow him to compete because he spent all his time out hunting and fishing. So, but Frederick was also another one that died early. I think he may well have been affected by it as well.
Is this the same David that was the artist?
Yes. Yes, the artist and hymn writer. Interesting that we have hymns from Emma, David, and Joseph III.
He was a fantastic artist. They called him a primitive artist, but he was very good and self-taught, from what I understand. His work is great, and it's still displayed in Nauvoo, isn't it?
The visitor center in Nauvoo has a number of his paintings, and the one you have behind you again today is also beautiful. I admired your birds when I first saw them. Sunrise or sunset, but your icicles are neat. I appreciate your paintings every time. I've had a nice dimension to the form.
Thank you. This one's called Slide Saddle.
Lines.
Slide.
Let's see. There's a saddle. I just construed the saddle horn as another bird.
Just one. Thank you. And good night.
Thank you.
Good night, Carol. Paul, do you want to sing your closing?
Okay, Raina's volunteering, I think, to go with them.
You sing with.
Do we have another hand?
We'll just.
Good night.
The Lord is watching over you. Good night. His blessings go before you. Good night. And we'll be praying for you.
So good night.
May God bless you.
Good
That
night.
was music to my ears.
Good night.
Good night. Merry Christmas.
Rose and Cheryl. Hi, Cheryl and John.